Hello guys and welcome back to my podcast. I actually forgot what my podcast is called now because I changed it. It is a different name. Wow. Oh my god. There you go. What the fuck is my podcast called? Maybe that's the podcast. Makes sense. Hello guys and welcome back to the Ruby Darcy podcast. This is so exciting. I'm bringing this episode on 2 different platforms. So you're either watching it on YouTube or you're listening to it in either Apple Podcasts and Spotify. I have a huge conversation today, and this conversation has very much been inspired by my new mentorship, which is a group mentorship program, which is running over 2 weeks, and it's really encompassing what it means to create momentum in your life and business, how to access it and how to keep it, and why the concept of creating and leveraging momentum is so much different to just doing the personal development work and just getting mentored, just like learning about yourself. It is so much deeper than that. And what I really see, just for context, right, of how I see momentum, it is encompassing everything that is on the other side of burnout, right? So the biggest enemy to momentum is burnout. And burnout is probably one of the biggest things that I experienced in my business journey. Like, oh my God, I'm talking like severely exhausted to the point where that was almost normalized because it was the only thing I experienced, to the point where I was just plugged out of everything I was doing. I was plugged out of content and socials for, long periods of time on end because I really didn't have the capacity to hold that because I was spread so thin with other commitments that I had. And even when I was showing up to those commitments, I was spread thin. And I made commitments by, like work, like doing my work. And it didn't come from the most potent contribution of energy. And I think that truly is not just great for business outcomes, but it's incredible for how we feel about ourselves, right? Because we know that we're showing up without full potential to whatever we're doing in a day. And I think I've even come into recently of what is my overarching mission? What is my actual focus? What is at the end of the tunnel? What do I really desire in my life and in my business? And what is that fully encompassing? And I really have come into the fact that it is actually, it to some degree sounds cliche, it's helping people fulfill their potential. But how I see it, and I see it with such a passionate point of view, that so many people will, 1, never access their full potential. 2, they just don't know that they have this incredible potential. And 3, they know that they have this incredible potential. They know they're destined for more, but a part of that quest is really hard. It seems like the mountain is huge. It seems like they're so far from where they want to be, and it's super overwhelming and disempowering. So I really want to encompass all of that into this episode and speak to you about momentum and my opinion on it, how I see momentum to be the catalyst of continuous long-term growth in life and business. I'm going to make references in business because that is the example that really landed me into this idea, but this is super relevant to any quest for success in whatever you actually aspire for yourself within your life, okay? So with momentum, and what I see it to be is continuous growth and bypassing anything that is going to slow you down along the way, or there's two parts to this, being able to navigate yourself through it and just know what you need to do in order to continue to move through it, right? Know what is actually required of you in order to move through those parts that feel heavy, the natural ebbs and flows, right? How to almost foresee when things are going to get slower, harder, or potentially burn you out, and actually come into prevention of these things based off your awareness around the concepts of momentum. So honestly, I think this is one of the most common things is people coming into business and thinking, and there's so much in business of like things you have to do, right? There's so many things back end and then on the actual front line of what you're doing, and there's so many things when it comes to ideas for growing and scaling, and it creates a lot of information overload, decision fatigue in general, right? Like that's just the tangible stuff. That's just what we see on the surface level, and that is a whole thing in itself. But then on top of that, there's also the mindset stuff as well. It's not just the decision fatigue, but it's also the mental fatigue, battling the self-worth piece, battling the expectation on yourself, battling the comparison with other people, battling imposter syndrome. And these are all things that do come up, and what I do believe actually stunt people's momentum in life and business, okay? So I really want to come into this. What I see with a lot of my clients in the business space, but also with myself, is coming into the slave archetype within business, but also mostly continuously putting things external to them before themselves. And it sounds quite simple, but really it's when you have this most incredible energy that you're actually putting it outwards into clients or business, or you're chasing the next thing, or even distracting yourself. You've got this output of energy and you're like, oh, I'll just go soothe a friend for what she's going through because I've got all this energy to support her. Or it's like, oh, I'll just go and like even scroll social media and completely bypass the fact that I'm sitting in my own energy right now, and that is super empowering. Like I can give that outwards. Or coming into the slave archetype, where I see a lot of people actually just being very much obsessed and in love with their business and their clients and wanting to do the most for them. Wanting to do the most, wanting to be the most compassionate and generous coach or business owner, leader, etc., or even friend, right? In relationships, it comes in here as well. Wanting to be the most, and often it's like, where to a degree is that actually neglecting your own needs, and you're constantly coming outwards with your energy, right? This is really, really powerful. And I think like the answer to motivation and momentum rather is always going to be internal of us. It is never external of us. So it's really coming in at any opportunity that we can to come in internal, and honestly like ask more questions to ourselves as well, because asking more questions compiles answers, it compiles evidence, it compiles feedback, it compiles self-awareness over the things. And I'm going to give you examples of questions to ask yourself, like in the sense of coming back internal with that power and that energy that you have, rather than going external to helping and soothing a friend, or to just being the most generous, like giving to clients all the time, and completely distracting yourself from working on yourself, right? Asking questions like, how did I actually feel today? What went well for me? What didn't go well? Why? What felt heavy and hard? What felt easy? What were my strengths? What were my weaknesses? Right? What did I learn from today? Okay, all of these questions, I think, create momentum, because it's creating, again, compiling evidence, compiling knowledge, compiling self-awareness, and compiling feedback. All of this is momentous. So it's like, that is where it's so, I guess, evident that the answer is always internal, right? The answer for what is going to drive us forward and propel us forward is actually on the other side of asking ourselves some really honest questions, but simple questions, right? And just doing that in itself, people either think like, one, this is actually, how did I feel today? Oh yeah, like good, this happened, because they're only willing to go surface level, that they don't actually see benefit in doing this type of work, right? Whereas if you sit with yourself for longer than 30 seconds and ask yourself another layer of questions, you then start to see the benefit and reap the rewards. But that in itself actually does take mental energy, right? But it is where I believe we need to be allocating energy in order to continue to move forward and to create momentum, right? And it even looks like, I'm going to give you an example for context. Like if you're experiencing imposter syndrome, I see it where people are like bypassing it as like, oh my God, of course, and then they'll even like victim bond with someone else and be like, oh my God, you feel imposter syndrome in the industry too? Like, oh my God, same, rather than actually, okay, why do I feel imposter syndrome? What evidence can I collect? What data can I collect to create momentum to move away from feeling the imposter syndrome, right? That is where the momentum lies. You have all of the answers within you, but your willingness to actually ask the question is what is going to dictate the speed in which you move, right? The next thing that really I want to speak to is coming into expectations on yourself. And I see this so much, and it really closely ties into the perfectionistic mindset, right? It's like I want to hold myself to this standard and I hold this expectation, and it can even look in day-to-day micro moments of like, I need to get all of my tasks done in this hour time block, or I need to do this to this level of standard, or I'm expecting myself to have this much money by this time in business, or I'm expecting myself to, insert expectation, right? Like it's really, really big, and what it can actually lead to is a huge misalignment of opportunity to create the sweet spot that initiates flow state, right? So with flow state, it's like the ideal amount of challenge or difficulty matched with the ideal amount of capability, right? Or competency or skill, okay, whatever you want to call it, describe it as. So if there is, I'm going to actually go into flow state because I think it's just such a powerful, I'm going to say, it's not an analogy, it's not a phrase, it's a concept, okay? It's a powerful concept to look into. So when we have, like think about, let me go into something that is too easy for you, right? Think about something that you can literally do in your sleep because you're so good at it. It's like low level of challenge, high level of skill and competency. If you were doing that every day, you'd feel bored, right? But on the other end, there's like too much challenge and difficulty and not enough skill or competency, you feel stressed and overwhelmed, right? So that's the two ends of the extreme. The middle ground is balancing both, having just the right amount of difficulty to match the amount of skill and competency within doing that. However, we should have just a little bit more difficulty or challenge or discomfort even to meet an edge for us to grow from it, right? To meet an edge for us to be stimulated enough to want to keep doing it or to be focused on it and then get in our flow. It's like Operation Detective of like, oh, I'm curious, I have enough stimulation to keep working at this and to keep my flow, right? Like I think that is so pivotal. But what happens when we set expectations so high, it's coming back into expectation or perfectionism of like where we expect ourselves to be, the standard we wish we hold ourselves at, that creates a big degree of challenge, right? And sometimes we place expectations above where we're actually at in life or business. Like we don't meet ourselves with our current ability, with our current experience, with our current reality of what would make sense for us to be really good at right now, right? Like, it'd be like, I can do this video, I'm going to use myself as an example, and that feels good, I'm stimulated and I'm in my flow speaking right now because there's enough difficulty and I'm competent enough to speak to a camera. However, if you put me in front of a stadium of 10,000 people or more, 100,000, whatever, I'd be dysregulated and that would be potentially too much of an edge. Or if you gave me a topic that I wasn't really competent, or I had an expectation on myself to come in with like making the most perfect video and not stopping, right? Or not stuttering or sounding so articulate and so perfect and all of that, of course that would stunt my momentum and I probably would have never pressed record and started doing this. So there's coming into that, and I think asking yourself, and throughout this I want to keep speaking to different areas, and I want you to utilize this as like a checklist, right? Of like, oh, is that me? It might not be you. Some of these things might not actually be relevant to you. However, I suspect that a lot of it would be, but potentially you just haven't sat with yourself enough to even know yourself enough to know why you're burnt out, to know why you lack momentum in your life. So honestly, I think come in with a grain of salt in like, that could be me, but it also might not be. So just really looking into both sides there, and continuously like asking yourself, like, if I did know the answer to what my lack of momentum would be, like, what would it be? So really looking at that, because again, as I said, you already have the answer internalized with you. You always do, and you always will. And I think another really powerful question is like asking yourself, what do you need for your life to be sustainable right now? Like, what level of expectation do you need for your life to be sustainable? What level of output are you going to give to others for that to be sustainable, for you to not feel burnt out because you're not actually putting any energy into your own development, into time for yourself? Okay, and this can really come into the whole like boundaries piece, and I want to speak to this as a new pillar as well of what I think can impact people's momentum in their life and business. And that is really coming into, okay, boundaries with both yourself and with others. And boundaries with yourself, and for myself, for an example, it's like I have to have my time in the morning. I have to put my energy in the start of the day into myself. I cannot do early morning calls. I do them sometimes, but if I do, I will always do something for myself prior. Or, you know, I'm not messaging WhatsApp as soon as I wake up. That energy is going into myself. Or I have specific boundaries. I don't message clients on weekends, you know, like sometimes I do, but that's when I've looked after myself first. And that sounds potentially selfish. A part of me used to think, oh my God, that's so selfish. I need to be giving all to my business. But by putting yourself first, the byproduct of that is actually everyone else around you and everything around you, being your goals and your intentions, getting the best of you anyway. And that was just such a pivotal lesson for me in business and in my life as well. So it's not a selfish, it's actually so selfless in that regard. So that, honestly, if you're going to take anything from that, it's like, put your damn self first. But I mean, other examples of boundaries with yourself is like even boundaries on the sense of obligation that you feel for helping and fixing and changing someone's life, you know, even in like the impact you have on your relationships or the impact that you have on your business. Yes, of course, you want to have the best impact possible, the best contribution possible. However, an obligation or feeling an obligation to fix somebody when it's potentially not your responsibility, or to go to this standard that potentially is like maybe like too much out of that zone of like your flow, we are coming into therefore actually just stunting momentum again. Right? Like we're just stunting momentum because we have this obligation to hold people, to fix them, to have the answer. And that is really, really heavy. And I think what helped me to sort of come out of this, and especially I'm going to use the coaching space for an example for context, is like if I was doing client calls and I wanted them to, you know, let's say they were plugging in or coming into a call feeling XYZ emotion, they had XYZ story playing out, it would then be like, for me, holding obligation would be to try and fully dissolve their stories, fully fix their mindset, and have them feeling like Ruby absolutely helped me so much, because that to me was what I was associating to be a good service, right? To be a good, well done job, right? But then it's like, actually, how can I create more interdependency within our relationship or with any relationship where it's actually just about guiding people to find their answer, guiding people to find their truth, guiding people to feel their best self via their own initiation. Otherwise, they're always going to attach that responsibility on you, or you're going to attach the responsibility on yourself, and that is super heavy to hold. But not only that, you know, in the coaching example, it's actually just not productive for your client as well, and particularly for friendships. Like, I see it a lot, or even romantic relationships, family members as well, is people hold an obligation that I have to be there for my friend or my partner or whatever every time that they're feeling really down. But like, you absolutely do not have an obligation. You have an obligation for yourself to initiate communication on the level of support that's going to feel good for you, so that you can continue your momentous state in life, but still uphold, of course, the relationship. But it's about getting really clear on what that is actually going to look like, and where you're taking on potentially too much responsibility and holding obligation for what you need to do, right? So there's the boundaries on yourself. That's that I could speak to that all day, but there's that. I'm going to tie that up. Boundaries on others as well, right? It's like, I see this often as well, and I've experienced it myself, is the resentment piece that comes in because somebody else has broken down your boundaries when you actually didn't clearly communicate them in the first place. Okay, so with the resentment piece, we know that that's a low frequency emotion, and we know that that is going to be a leak, and it's going to drain us, and it's going to contribute to an outcome of burnout potentially. So it's like, even asking yourself in that moment, like, where do I have resentment? What resentment do I have right now for anybody? Asking and sitting in that question can be really powerful, because that's going to patch up any emotional leaks that you do have in your relationships and in your life. Okay, and resentment, how can we turn that back on you? What are you responsible for in not actually communicating things very well with boundaries with others? But I think it's super, super important to have boundaries with others, even if they do expect you to be more than you actually need to be for them. Again, coming back to that obligation piece, that's really powerful. You know, like, hey, like, it feels good for me to support you at this level, but I'm not available here. Or, you know, I can catch up with you for an hour, but I'm not available after that. Like, this is just really surface level examples, but it's like being really clear and just knowing that you're totally allowed to do that. What I'll also touch on, and I wasn't actually going to go there, is like even just the emotional intelligence piece of being so aware of how you're feeling in the moment, okay? And really asking yourself to identify the emotions that you're currently experiencing, because if you're seeing emotions of stress, anxiety, fear, resentment, guilt, shame, anger, all the things, they are heavy emotions to hold. They are going to slow you down. They are going to contribute to a lack of momentum in your life, in your business. So something to look at, right? It's not just like holding them and assuming that's normal. It's not normal to feel that. Like, yes, it's normal to have a human experience and experience those emotions, yes, but when they become a pattern, it's not normal, and it's something that is going to continue to drain energy until you're feeling burnt out and wonder why you do feel burnt out, right? And wonder why you cannot continue this state of momentous growth within your life and business. So it's continuously, coming back to that intention, right? And then coming into like even just questioning the piece further about your lack of momentum, and really looking at what is the undercurrent of this. I love to ask that question, and for me, that question is like, what is the layer beneath this? Like, is there another layer? E.g., like, there's procrastination at play here. There's the imposter syndrome. There's comparison. Like, I'm constantly comparing myself. There's competitiveness of like, oh, when she does that, I do this. Or, you know, like, oh my God, I feel triggered and activated when somebody achieves that or does that or speaks about that, right? That is going to be an example of an undercurrent within your burnout. So it's identifying that competitiveness or imposter syndrome or XYZ has a big part to play in why I feel a lack of momentum, right? So there are so many pieces at play that could be at play, and it's really up to you listening to this, watching this, to access your own awareness or discernment to discern which piece is actually yours, which is actually appropriate for your current situation. And there's your answer. Like, as I said again, the answer is always within you. It's always internal of you, but it takes the quest to actually uncover it. And honestly, that's often just sitting with yourself and recognizing patterns. And for me, like, in terms of business growth and life growth and personal development, that has been the pivotal thing. And I spoke to this the other day on my stories, just about how, we do pedestal the personal development industry in what we can trade in terms of goods and services. Yes, it is fucking incredible, all of that stuff, and the industry is going off and it's great and it's perfect. However, often we just need to look in the mirror and take responsibility and have a hard conversation with yourself. That is the big element to it, okay? And I think it's important to do that first and then actually look outwards of, okay, what tool or resource or support external to me can I use to elevate this experience of growth, right? To enhance this experience of growth. That's a really, really big one, okay? And then the final thing that I wanted to touch into, and this is an example of the undercurrent piece as well of, what's the undercurrent of my burnout? What's the undercurrent of how I'm feeling or the lack of momentum? But I think it's a common one, so I wanted to actually just speak to it separately, and that is the self-worth thing. And for me, this was actually, I've honestly just, like, this memory and this thought has only just come into my mind just as I said that, and that's why I'm laughing, because I'm remembering and recollecting on the ego death that I had last year in 2022, which shook me so hard to the point where I was like, I didn't even see this in myself, and it shook me. So someone reflected to me that I actually had low self-worth, and it was obviously not in like, you have low self-worth. Like, it was like, okay, that behavior is playing out in you, this is happening, that's a self-worth thing. And I was like, oh fuck. And I was like so upset about it, because I was like, oh my god, I have like no self-worth, like catastrophizing, of course, in that emotional response. But then it was so interesting to see that part of me always identified with being someone who had a high level of self-worth, because I established I respect myself, so that means I have self-worth. But they're two different conversations, they're two different things, right? So the worthiness piece is a huge piece in our life and in our business, and I see it everywhere. I see this in all my business client conversations. I see this in relationships. You can see it in other people. It stands out so clearly, and you start to see it in yourself in examples of when you're making things, conversations with others, encounters, the way you're speaking to your content, or whatever it is, right? You're making it more about yourself than about other people, right? Because you're constantly hyper vigilant, and this can be consciously or likely unconsciously you don't actually recognize, where you're trying to control other people's perception of you. And it's not even like, oh, I just want them to like me. It's even like, I'm going to say something that sounds really smart so that I can unconsciously manipulate the way that they perceive me and start to think that I'm a smart person. Like, I'm probably doing that for you guys right now, like full honesty, right? But it's like, it's a concept of self thing as much as it's a self-worth thing. So it's like, if we tie so much worth to these concepts within our identity of like, I'm only worthy if I possess this, this, and this, and when that doesn't come through, we have that low self-worth, right? So this is really interesting, and how I even see it with my business clients. I'm going to give you a different example, but just to explore here, is like, I have a client that was going like so above and beyond and really over delivering in getting clients, or getting a new service set up for her clients, right? And it was that she was doing all these other products, and she was like, I just want to give them so much. I want to give them a resource here and an ebook, and I want to make sure that's good, and I want to make sure that looks like this, and I want to have this customized and do all of that. And I think that is great. There is an element where that is absolutely wonderful. It's going to make your business look incredible and beautiful, and it's going to create brand and all the things. However, if it's coming from the worth piece of like, oh my God, I'm only going to be worthy of my clients when I've got this, this, and this, right? Or I'm only going to be able to appreciate my business or my like what I'm doing or myself when I've done this and made it look like this, right? So where are you actually making what you're doing more about a self-worth thing for yourself to feel good, rather than actually asking what do other people actually need from me right now, right? So again, come back to this client example. It's like we spoke and we reflected that you are the service. You are not, your business is a service. It is not a product, right? Your clients are not coming to you for these incredible bougie looking things and this like extra resource that actually just doesn't relate to their specific need, their specific problem, their specific journey. They come to you because they want you. They want your support. They want your wisdom. They want to be in your energy, in your proximity, all of that. And it's like, if we look at that, you don't have to change a single thing. You just have to be you. Of course, there's the commitment to growth and all of that, which goes unsaid, but it's really like, you are like perfect the way that you are. We don't have to, present as these things in order to unconsciously control the way that others perceive us. Often it's like, what do they actually want from me right now? In terms of like, they might just need a shoulder to cry on. They don't need us to like come out with, oh my God, you should do this, 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 and this. They don't need to consider you as an expert in that moment. They need to consider you as just a listener, right? And like, that's another example. Like that's like in its own little box, but there are so many examples, and I honestly think people just do it constantly. And it's about looking at where you're doing it and asking yourself, where am I making this moment about me right now? Because there's actually, and I want to say there's always like two sides to this, because that's great. And you should be thinking about yourself, and you should be thinking about how you look in that moment. But to which extent is that actually there's an undercurrent of a self-worth issue that is actually draining your energy, because so much attention is going to maintaining a level of worthiness and maintaining the way that others perceive you, right? So huge conversation. And what I really want you guys to take from this is to just look at, cool, like these were really interesting check boxes that I could potentially check to see where I could learn or where I could establish more data collection in where I'm not looking, and what may potentially be a reason as to why I'm not growing and evolving, right? Perfect. Look at that. Tick off the checklist. Okay. But also the way you do that, I really want it to be from an energy that is excited and it is grateful to see these things, not an energy where you feel shame, where you feel like the victim, where you feel even more stuck. And that in itself, those two different sides to the coin, where you're feeling the excited emotion, the gratitude, or you're feeling the victim, the shame, those two avenues are choice, right? It's choosing how you respond to this podcast, how you respond to listening to this information, right? You get to choose that and be conscious of it, because a part of you will take over and do the decision making for you, right? Just like it always does. So coming into awareness of that in itself, I feel like you immediately elevate yourself and you immediately initiate momentum within your life, your business, relationships, etc. So, wow, this conversation has really been amazing. I think you guys are going to get a lot out of that if you really even listen to it again and just listen to the points, because this stuff, once you look at it, once you uncover that, so much gets to change and move. You start to feel lighter, right? You start to feel like things are easier. You really do start to see your own power within you, because as I said, and I'll continue to say it, you always have your own internalized power, okay? So if you got value from this, guys, please let me know, leave a review, share to your stories, or share with somebody that you think will benefit from it. And if you desire more of this conversation, my Group Mindset Mentorship starts on March the 13th of 2023, whenever you're listening to this. So that's really exciting. It will only be limited spaces. It is a really intimate space that I want to keep potent. I want to just be a safe space for us to explore ways in which we can initiate momentum in our life, but also just bring in anything else that you want to be supported in, that you want to be educated in, that you actually want to ask questions to other members in the group as well and be coached by them. Because let me tell you, the people in this space already, you just want to be next to them. You really do. And the investment is my lowest ticket investment to work with me. So honestly, it'd be silly not to join. I truly think if you vibe with what I say, if you vibe with personal growth and the industry, this space is going to be a huge kickstart to your journey and in momentous and continuous growth. So thank you guys so much for listening. I appreciate it. And I will catch you in my next episode.